Keep yourself in the loop of everything football on the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast. The latest news on and off the field, be it college football, Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC to the NFL. We've got you covered. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast.
Welcome in to the GSMC Football Podcast right here in the GSMC Podcast Network. It is your host, Brice Lewis, back at it again with more news updates around the league and college world of football. Obviously, you're currently going through a time right now where a lot of things have happened. And so we have to discuss all that here in the podcast. Pretty much today we're just going to talk about, like I said, things that are happening around social injustice protests, potentially with what the NBA has done. Also, we're talking obviously about just, things around the training camp, obviously training camp news, Washington news, a lot of things, so we're going to kind of bounce around a little bit today on the podcast and talk about a few different things. So, we're just going to do all that and kind of make something shake. But we're going to go ahead and get into it and go into the Washington football team as they've canceled practice to protest shootings of Jacob Blake. The Washington football team obviously has elected to cancel their practice on Thursday in the wake of the police shooting of Jacob Blake. The senior vice president of media and content, Julia Donaldson, released a statement from head coach Ron Rivera announcing that she would support. And I'm going to go ahead and read this press release to you guys about what was said. And so this is what they said, and I quote, "Jason Wright and I worked this afternoon to develop a response that was the right balance between business of football and being truly thoughtful about the social injustice we've witnessed with the latest incident in Wisconsin. We went to Mr. Snyder with our plan for tomorrow, and we were given complete support and approval. Friday, we can return to football, but tomorrow, which is Thursday, will be about reflection instead in place of our practice. At FedEx Field, the players, coaches, football staff will meet as a football family, and we will continue our open dialogue on the issues of racism and social injustice in our country. Mr. Snyder and Jason will join us in our discussion with the team tomorrow, just as Mr. Snyder and I will support Jason in similar discussions we are planning for members of business and stadium side of the organization. We are all in this together, and as a team, we will work to continue to figure out ways that can make a positive impact in our communities." So, obviously, also, the Detroit Lions also canceled their practice to protest the shooting of Jacob Blake. Lions players have been very active, saying we won't be silent. Obviously, again, this obviously comes from what happened in the basketball world when the Milwaukee Bucks elected to sit out Wednesday's playoff game against the Orlando Magic in protest, and then the NBA went on to announce that the other 3 games were postponed as well. Obviously, that also other leagues got involved. The WNBA were involved. Major League Baseball was involved. Obviously, we know what's happening within the Washington football team right now with Dan Snyder and stuff. Obviously, I'll discuss that more later in the podcast, but we know what's going on there. And it's just basically a lot's going on right now. And really, it raises a big question that I like to discuss here. Are we going to potentially see football players decide to protest games? Is that something that realistically could happen? I think that's a question that a lot of people are wondering about, because they wonder, is that something that the league players are thinking? Because obviously a lot of players, when the NBA decided to do this, came out in support of the NBA and other sports. And, that question now is being raised of protests are legitimately in the works of happening. Obviously, we still have about 2 weeks away from the first official football game of the new regular season. So there's 2 weeks in between now and then. You don't know what could happen between now and then, but that's obviously a question that could be raised. Obviously, people are keeping an eye on the Dallas Cowboys situation because of the fact that Jerry Jones has not been active on this issue, and his players have been. And then when he broke radio silence, the way he compared the 2017 situation to now and talk about, we need to implement a compromise and stuff like that, will some Dallas Cowboys players feel uncomfortable playing for him? It's kind of one of those things where you kind of got to see what happens. I mean, there's a lot here and a lot of different things that could potentially come out of this right now, and it's a very trying time, I would say, in the country. The football players, we have yet to see a football team or player say they're going to do anything of such activism. We might not, but we might will. I mean, listen, when their season starts and let's say another shooting like this happens or something like this happens, what would the NFL do while the season is going on? Would they, postpone? And obviously, seeing all the reactions from everybody on social media, as being a part of the sports media, the sporting world, like they've mentioned before with NBA, they are not postponing the season because of COVID. They're postponing the season because of the racial injustice, because of racism. And so the NFL, they kind of have shoes they have to follow in, where y'all, as the players have said, they are in support of the basketball players for doing this and other leagues for doing this as well. So now the question would be, after that, if y'all were put into that same situation, would the football teams respond the same way? Would they be willing to sit out a game for that? And then how would the NFL as a league respond to that as well? Those are all questions. And I know people are looking for answers. So it's definitely something that will probably continue to linger on. I don't think it's something that's just going to go away. It shouldn't. It shouldn't just go away. It's something I think that's going to stick for a while. And we're going to have to see, how everything looks and turns out. We're going to have to see if what the mission of these social movements are going to be achieved and stuff, Obviously, these NFL players have platforms, and they have the ability to reach out, and they have the ability to contact top people in their political offices and everything like that, and ask for change and ask for, the fixing of many things that happen in the society today. So it's just we got to see what happens. I mean, listen, when the Lions came out at their practice and had a sign in front of their practice facility demanding change, I mean, that struck a lot of people because not only did they cancel practice, and it wasn't like just everybody was just at home chilling. They still came together, and they said we're gonna send a message. Because in this time of United States right now, I think a lot of people are trying to send a message. I think a lot of people are trying to send a message to local law enforcement that we will not stand for this injustice. We will not stand for you assaulting people of color and killing people of color without much reason to do that. You know, and I think right now that's what's kind of the biggest thing in the country. Is the reasoning of this, like, why do this? Why have this happen? Why, even put yourself in a situation to be criticized like this? Why do all of that? Because obviously the police is supposed to protect us, but it feels like they're killing us more than they're protecting us, especially people of color. And so I expect this, to me, in my gut feeling, I expect this to go into the season. If anything else happens, obviously as we get closer to election day, I'm sure you'll see NFL players in press conferences and practices and games trying to be more active with with the messages that they're trying to send. And I think that's going to be one of the biggest things right now that's happening. And we're going to have to see if they can pull off what they're trying to pull off and accomplish what they want to accomplish. Because that's going to kind of be the biggest thing right now that they're trying to do and accomplish right at the moment to help justify and protect their fellow players and make sure that they're safe at all times. So it's one of those things that you just kind of have to stay tuned for, in a way, and continue to, stay on top of. Definitely, if this continues in the country, I definitely see the NFL players doing something like this. Obviously, I see players contact one another and basically try to do everything they can to be like, listen, if this continues, we will not stand for it. We will not deal with it. We will not continue to deal with this injustice that has been going on right now. And they will fight against the cause because they understand what's going on is wrong and change is needed to change the wrong that has been done in terms of reforms, defunding of the police, etc. Black Lives Matter. It's just a really big uproar right now within the country. And like I said, a lot of decisions need to be made. A lot of things need to be changed. And so we're going to have to see how it all turns out and how it all comes together. So we're going to have to see if it all comes to be what happens within the NFL. But obviously, like I said, Wednesday was a big day in the sporting world in general. So obviously we had to, obviously bring that up here on the podcast and talk about that. Maybe I give my thoughts as best as I could about it. So, but coming up next, we're going to get to some NFL news. So stay tuned right here on the GSMC Football Podcast for that. Listen up, sports bettors. This is Brice, here to tell you about my favorite sports book, and that's BetUS. Football, basketball, and baseball are all back, and that means it's time to get down your bets. I only endorse one sports book, and that's BetUS.com. Why, you ask? BetUS is the pioneer in online betting with more than 25 years in the biz. You need a sports book with integrity and longevity, and you need to know that you're going to get paid. You need a sports book that's going to offer everything, including live betting MMA, golf, horses, esports, entertainment, and all kinds of crazy prop bets and futures. Call today at 1-800-MyBetUS. That's 1-800-MyBetUS, and they will talk you through getting started. Nobody in the industry gives bigger bonuses than BetUS. Join now, mention GSMC, and you can get up to 150% in bonuses on your first deposit. Nobody beats that. I bet at BetUS, and so should you. Join BetUS today. That's betus.com or call 1-800-MyBetUS. Mention GSMC to get 150 in bonuses on your first deposit.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's GSMCpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, I gave my thoughts on what's happening around the sporting world, obviously how it affects the NFL, as obviously as we know, many sports across the sports landscape, mainly the NBA, decided to boycott, protest games, not play the games they were supposed to participate in. Obviously, because of the injustice that happened in Wisconsin with Jake Blake. And so, obviously, that's obviously a big thing going on forward. And I decided to give my thoughts on that for the entire first segment of the show. So that's where I stand on that. Obviously, as the NFL season approaches here in about 2 weeks, we'll keep an eye out on what's new and what's coming up going forward. But this segment, we have a few things we're also going to talk about right here. We're going to start with an article here from NFL Insiders. There's shock over Ravens' Earl Thomas cuts stalls signing with new team. Obviously, Earl Thomas has been in the news, obviously being released by the Baltimore Ravens after getting into a fight with the backup safety, Kenny Clark. Obviously, the team taking the backup safeties, the Ravens, one of the most prestigious organizations, that you always think is the health of good locker room, cutting him. Obviously, you know what happened with him in Seattle about the contract extension. So, obviously, there is some concern around Earl Thomas. Maybe if he's a toxic player, is he worth the trouble, et cetera, et cetera. Could this be another Antonio Brown situation, potentially? Some people wonder as well. But we're going to get to it by Kalen Collar. Our article that was written, and we're going to read it right here, and we'll talk about it right after, about, you know, what's happening with Earl Thomas. But, and I quote according to this article, when the Ravens released 7-time Pro Bowl safety Earl Thomas on Sunday, many coaches and evaluators around the league were surprised and confused. Not that Thomas punched a fellow safety during practice, but that the team with a highly respected veteran head coach and a defined culture hadn't been able to minimize the impact of Thomas's behavior in his season plus with the team. If a guy like Harbaugh couldn't savage him, that is odd, said a veteran evaluator, because Harbaugh and the Ravens aren't afraid of passionate, edgy guys. That Baltimore thing is a little alarming because of the strong culture they have there, a personal executive said. Thomas isn't radioactive everywhere yet, but based on Bleacher Report's conversations with sources around the league, teams are jawed by Thomas's abrupt release from Baltimore, and they aren't quite sure what to make of it. There are conflicting reports on whether the Cowboys are interested in Thomas. According to NFL Network Ian Rappaport, they are not expected to pursue him. However, Cowboys owner Jerry Jones said on 105.3 The Fan that Rappaport doesn't know what he's talking about. Falcons head coach Dan Quinn, who previously coached Thomas as Seattle's defensive coordinator, told reporters Tuesday that the Falcons aren't interested. The head coaches for two other teams linked to Thomas, 49ers and Texans, also denied any interest. The free agent safety teams are reaching out to is another former Raven, Tony Jefferson, who's nearly recovered from an ACL injury. Several sources brought up what happened in the offseason between Thomas and his wife as another factor that could concern teams evaluating the safety. According to court documents obtained by TMZ, Thomas's wife, Nia Thomas, was arrested in April after she had pointed a gun at Earl's head during an argument. Nia said she confronted her husband at an Airbnb because she thought he was cheating on her. Thomas has already been a free agent for 3 days. The veteran evaluator cited above expects the team to sign Thomas eventually, but only after he goes on an apology tour, he said. The coaching fraternity is scratching their heads with the Ravens letting him walk out of the building. Earl will have to wait for that initial shock to wear off. Thomas's agent did not return a call for comment. Another factor in how quickly Thomas might sign is the coronavirus protocol. It takes 3 days to get a free agent in the building because a player has to test negative 3 consecutive times for entry to a team facility. With the limitations to the offseason and a shortened training camp, many teams are still sorting out their current rosters. As the days go by, Thomas may end up having to agree to something short of his ideal contract. As teams around the league weigh the pros and cons, they'll dig into Thomas's behavior with the Ravens and Seahawks, and even a little earlier. Bleacher Report talked to multiple scouts who scouted Thomas at Texas when he declared for the 2010 draft, and none recalled Thomas having any pressing character issues coming into the pros. NBC sports columnist Peter King reported that in Baltimore, Thomas was not well liked by his teammates. He had a pattern of being late, he missed at least one walkthrough with no valid excuse, and he made mistakes in practice because he was unprepared. King reported that Raven players backed Chark Clark, the teammate Thomas punched during an argument over a missed assignment. Instead of Thomas, the Athletic's Jeff Zerbick reported that several veteran players told Harbaugh the team would be better off without Thomas. One source close to the Seahawks said he wasn't aware of Thomas having any of those issues in Seattle from 2010 to 2018. The source said Thomas has always had a unique personality, but he was well liked by his Seattle teammates. And the Legion of Boom was a very tight-knit group that spent a lot of time together off the field. He is just wired differently, the source said. There is almost an intensity about him. 49ers cornerback Richard Sherman, who is close to Thomas in the Legion of Boom secretary, tweeted his support, saying, "It's really sad how things have played out for a man who is like a brother to me." Just Texans QB Deshaun Watson and Rams cornerback Jalen Ramsey also tweeted their support for Thomas, with whom they share the same agent. An agent who represented a former Seattle teammate of Thomas said that Thomas changed after the Seahawks lost the Super Bowl in February 2015. The agent said Thomas was known for being entitled, and he didn't study the playbook enough, so fellow safety Cam Chancellor bailed him out frequently on the field. The previous offseason, Seattle had made Thomas the highest paid safety in the league. With the amount of digging the NFL teams do in the free agent process, the Ravens likely had all the background on Thomas and knew what they were getting. The last visual of Thomas in a Seattle Seahawks jersey was a telling side. He raised the middle finger to head coach Pete Carroll while riding the injury cart off the field with a broken leg that ended his 2018 season. Thomas had been in a contract dispute with the team since the previous offseason. He told ESPN he didn't think Carroll's concern about his injury was honest. Carroll encourages players to be themselves and allows more freedom for that than most NFL head coaches. Back when the Legion of Boom days, when the Seahawks won the Super Bowl and then returned to the title game the following season, Carroll cultivated a brash, renegade atmosphere. In the words of a personnel evaluator who found Baltimore's situation a little alarming. Another veteran evaluator brought up former Seahawks defensive end Michael Bennett as an example of a Seahawks' lob Legion of Boom era player who struggled after leaving Seattle to play for a new team. Bennett played for the Eagles, Patriots, and Cowboys in 2018 and 19 and was suspended for 1 week by New England last week for what he called a philosophical disagreement with his position coach. The evaluator raised an interesting question. Does Seattle's rare ability to handle multiple alpha personalities make it difficult for those players to adjust when they move to a team with a different structure and culture? Sherman's career would prove otherwise, as he is an example of a big personality who found success after leaving Seattle for San Francisco as a free agent in 2018. Defensive end Bruce Irvin started his career in Seattle in 2012, and then left to play 4 seasons with the Raiders, Falcons, and Panthers, and now he's back in Seattle. And in the most recent media availability, Irvin told reporters he had no idea how different it was in Seattle until he left. And he said, and I quote, "This is a very special place. It took me to leave here to really notice that," he said. "I was a young guy who when I was here, I'd say blank, I wonder how it is on another team. And the VP of player engagement, Maurice Kelly, would tell me, the grass isn't always greener. And when I got to other teams, I realized that is really a good situation over there, and guys hold each other accountable." I think there's something to that, the source said to Seattle. Earl had his alpha personality anyway, and then team success. The money comes with all that. They all got paid at the top of their positions. So how do you ever put that away? How do you suppress that part of yourself to fit in? The moment is a turning point for Thomas at 31 years old and entering his 11th season. He's nearing the end of his career. Thomas struggled to adjust to a new Ravens defense, just as Derrick Henry or Nick Chubb, and only had 2 interceptions, but he was still voted to the Pro Bowl, and he is still an elite player who can improve the backfield of many defenses in the league. Wherever Thomas ends up signing next, and whoever he acts with his new team will define his post-Legion of Boom legacy, which for now will be defined by 2 actions: a middle finger and a punch. And that's the article right there. So obviously, as you can tell, a lot of stuff right now is surrounding Earl Thomas and his future and what, he's supposed to do. Obviously, we hope he doesn't, with the personality sometimes in these locker room environments, you're so used to being able to get away with something or being allowed to do something in a certain locker room, because it really shows you that every locker room in the NFL is not the same. Not every locker room is built the same. New England's culture is different from Baltimore's culture, but they're both considered great cultures. Pittsburgh's culture has been questioned before, obviously, because of the fact that they allow their players to have alpha personalities, but there's been questions, can Mike Tomlin control it? Does it affect the team? Does it affect performance? Because you've seen what's happened, like I said, with an Antonio Brown, with a Le'Veon Bell, with a Ben Roethlisberger. But you haven't had those same issues with Seattle. You never really heard players having issues in Seattle with each other. Earl Thomas, like I said, was really one of the first people who really vocally kind of showed displeasure towards the culture of Seattle and the organization of Seattle. Obviously, like they said, when he was carted off and flipped the middle finger. So you can clearly tell a little bit that each side is not necessarily on the same page when it comes to this. And so for me, I think it's important with everything that's going on right now to really look at NFL locker rooms and really, it happens. A lot of these players have egos. And so when you go to a certain locker room, you have to have players who keep them in check. This article told me something I didn't know. That it seems like a common theme is that Earl Thomas is not a big studier. He's not a big playbook guy. He kind of just does things, or he does a little bit, or he looks at it a little bit, but doesn't understand every single concept to the fullest degree and detail that he needs to. And it was interesting in the article how they pointed out that Cam Chancellor had to sometimes cover for him. So did that mean that Cam Chancellor had to go against something he was supposed to do to protect Earl? Was it that, because when we watched Seattle, we thought Earl Thomas was the playmaking great safety. So what did Cam do to help to Earl have that reputation? Did he have to on play say, "Hey Earl, this is what you're supposed to do," and basically have to correct him while the play is about to go on, so to make sure that they're in the best position? I mean, that's interesting to me. And the thing about it is, like I said, there's no, I don't hope he's in the league or anything like that. That's not where this is at all right now. But obviously, I can understand within the Baltimore culture, if a player flames out there within the environment, why that would cause pause. Because if he can't thrive in that environment, what makes you think he can thrive in an environment that may not be as great as that? And I think that's why a lot of people will probably look at it and think, man, that's kind of crazy. What's going on here? So Earl has a lot of things that he has to, figure out on his own and really get himself back in order so he could be productive for another team, but also not ruin potential chemistry in the locker room. But that's all the time we have here for this segment. Coming up next, we're going to get into some more news around the NFL right here on the podcast.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
And the concerns that people have around the league based off the things that have happened in Baltimore and Seattle, obviously alarming some teams. Questions of who's interested, how a lot of teams have ruled him out just instantly, that he had any connections to. Obviously, this brings up a lot of questions, and people are wondering what's going on. But we'll have to see how it all works out and how everything turns out. So really right now, what we're going to get into is now we're going to get to somewhat of a disturbing, story that's been going on with Dan Snyder, the owner of the Washington football team. Obviously, a lot of people are pressing for him to sell the team just because they feel like he hasn't been a good owner in general. But now all these accusations and stories have came back about him having a toxic work environment that he has created there at Washington. And now we have another article that came out giving more details on what's happened. I'm going to read the article to you. Then I will read the statements from both the Washington football team and Dan Snyder on this as well, to give you all the information that you guys are probably looking for on this story. And then I'll give my thoughts afterwards. So we're going to get ahead and go into it by Joseph Zucker, Bleacher Report. Obviously, we're going to get into his article right here. A new report from the Washington Post detailed further allegations of a toxic work environment behind the scenes with the Washington football team. The Post's Will Hobson, Beth Renard, Liz Clark, and Dalton Bennett interviewed more than 100 current and former employees and looked over internal documents and records from the team. All together, they portray team owner Dan Snyder as allegedly presiding over an organization in which women say they have been marginalized, discriminated against, and exploited. ESPN's Adam Schefter shared a statement from Snyder that read in part, "While I was unaware of these allegations until they surfaced in the media, I take full responsibility for the culture of our organization." And he further went on to refute a number of claims within the Post, which I again will read to you guys after I'm done reading this article, but continuing on. Former cheerleader Tiffany Bacon recounted one encounter at a charity event in 2004. She said Snyder had motioned to Anthony Roberts, a friend of his and an apologist for the team. Skirby said Snyder suggested she and Roberts should go upstairs and get to know each other better at a hotel room he had at Washington Hilton, where the event was taking place. Former cheerleader director Donald Wells told the Post that Skirby had discussed the encounter with him and that she was more or less positioned. Wednesday's story opened with allegations that Larry Michael, the team's former senior vice president of content and radio broadcast, instructed employees to collect lawed outtakes from a video of cheerleaders' 2018 calendar shoot. Michael indicated to the staff members the separate video would be for Snyder. Michael denied the allegations to the Washington Post. Brad Baker, a video producer who worked with Michael, went on record to explain Michael's alleged involvement. Larry said something to the effect of, "We have a special project that we need to get done for the owner today. He needs us to get a good bits of behind-the-scenes video from the cheerleaders shoot onto a DVD form." The Post was provided with copies of both 2008 outtake videos and another version of the 2010 shoot. The Post also interviewed Susan Miller, who served as the president of the employee referral agency in Virginia. Miller explained how she ceased directing people to work for the Washington football team because of the general atmosphere and Snyder's behavior. He likes integrated people, she said. He treated women like service. Washington released a statement Wednesday night regarding the allegations and report. I'm going to go ahead and read this one to you, then go back to the article. But like I said, we're going to read Dan Snyder's comments after. The Washington football team said this about the article. Today, the Washington Post published an article detailing additional allegations of sexual harassment and other misconduct at the Washington football team. We are deeply distressed by these terrible allegations and are committed to investigating them fully. Our priority is creating a culture where employees on and off the field are requested and empowered. Our first concern is the safety and security of our teammates. We have encouraged any employees who have endured similar experiences now or in the past to report it immediately. We are already taking a series of additional steps to hold ourselves accountable in our commitments. We remain focused on building an organization where all employees feel valued and are invested in shaping the new direction of our franchise. And that's what the Washington football team said there. But going back to the article, last month, the Washington Post interviewed 15 women who said they were victims of sexual harassment and verbal abuse while working for the team. Michael and former director of pro personnel Alex Santos were among those named in the report. At the time, the Post specified that none of the women accused Snyder or longtime team president Bruce Allen of inappropriate behavior with women, but they expressed skepticism that the men were unaware of the behavior they allege. Snyder issued a statement after July's report saying that the team was bringing in an outside law firm to do a full, unbiased investigation and make any of all requisite recommendations. The Washington Post's July investigation wasn't the first time Washington has faced scrutiny for how it's treated its female employers. In May 2018, the New York Times' Juliet Merker reported on a cheerleading squad's 2013 trip to Costa Rica for a calendar photo shoot. The team allowed some sponsors and suit holders to receive some up-close access to photo shoots, and some of the sponsors selected cheerleaders to be personal escorts at a nightclub. So obviously, that's the article. Now we're going to get into what Dan Snyder said about the allegations. And I'm only going to read some of this. I'm not going to read all of it, because it's pretty lengthy. But he said this: the behavior described in the Washington Post's latest story has no place in our franchise or in our society. While I was unaware of these allegations until they surfaced in the media, I take full responsibility for our organization. Even before today's article, I have begun taking any of all steps necessary to ensure that the Washington football team is an organization that is diverse, inclusive, and respectful of all. I have admittedly been too hands-off as an owner and allowed others to have day-to-day control to the detriment of our organization. Going forward, I am going to be more involved. We already have made some major changes in personnel, bringing in new leadership to drive cultural transformation on and up the field. In addition, we are assembling a world-class team of internal advisors to both investigate these allegations and create an actionable and measurable plan to change our culture. The Washington Post article reads like a hit job, relying on unnamed sources and allegations that are largely 10 to 22 years old. We attempted to engage with the Washington Post to provide them with the facts, but those facts clearly didn't align with their narrative. There are former employees on the record disputing many of these claims, and yet they will appear in print, and it is clear that these are other negative agendas at work in this reporting. We are disappointed that Ms. Scorber would speak to a newspaper but never bring any of these allegations to management's attention, particularly since she still is part of our organization as a volunteer with our cheerleaders. I want to unequivocally state that this has never happened. Ms. Scorby did not report this alleged incident to anybody at the team in 2004, and in her 8 years as a cheerleader, or at any time in the past 16 years. Furthermore, I do not have any knowledge of a 10-year-old video in reference in the story. I did not request the creation, and I never saw them. There are former employees on the record stating that this did not happen. The unnamed sources who claim it did happen are relying on third degrees of hearsay After an extensive review of our video archives, we believe these videos to be unauthorized and fraudulent. We requested that the Post provide us with copies of these videos to be, evaluated and authenticated, but the Washington Post refused to do so. This article is riddled with questionable and unnamed sources, decades-old allegations, and is not a reflection of the Washington football team today. I am going to work relentlessly to improve all aspects of the Washington football team and make this an organization that sets a positive example that we can all be proud of. So there you go. Right there, people. That was Dan Snyder's statement about what everything that's going on right now with his current team and his current organization. So obviously these are very serious accusations right now that's going on right now. The Washington football team has been in shambles just as an organization, not only just with these accusations, obviously them having to change their name because of the Redskins name they used to use for their franchise and how that has offended many Native Americans. People have been pressing for Dan Snyder to sell the team, and there's even Washington minority owners trying to press to sell the team. I mean, it just feels like there's no way that Dan Snyder is going to get through this situation and keep watch. I just don't see how he can still be the owner years down the line with all this eternal pressure, because of everything that's happened. And it's like now in the climate we are in the world, he now has to do things because if he resists it, it's going to make him look terrible. But is him now doing it because he has to, because of the climate we in, enough for maybe the NFL to still sit here and say, okay, he doesn't have to sell the team? I think that everybody would be very happy if he was not the owner of the team anymore. And I think that's what everybody's going to ideally hope that happens in the future, that they do allow the team to be sold to a new management and new ownership and allow a new... And honestly, it's almost like this as well. It cannot truly be a true fresh start unless Dan Snyder to me goes. Because with everything that's happened, it's happened under him. It's happened under his watch. It is his responsibility. The culture is his responsibility. And somebody has to take a fall. There has to be a consequence, and he's the guy who has to take the consequence. So to me, it is needed for him to relinquish his grip of the team so whoever comes in as new management can truly restart the Washington football team, moving on into whatever their new name will be, moving on into what they want to be moving forward. I think that's going to be the big thing, moving forward. And that's why, I just think that would be the best move, I think, in general, for them to make right now. And that's letting the team be sold and also getting down to the facts of what's happening within the organization. These types of accusations don't just come out randomly because people just want to see you fall. Like, sometimes something must have happened for this to start up. And, the Washington Post has usually been one of the most reliable posts in newspapers because, listen, it's Washington. They literally live where the White House is. They're literally reporting on consistent White House news because that's where the White House is and the president is. So you don't think that they're trying to make sure they get the correct reporting out there within their own little area of the capital, the world, or the United States? So I'm sure, listen, we'll see how much maybe could be fabricated, but these accusations have to be addressed, and Dan Snyder needs to be held accountable, and that's just as simple as I can put it to you. He needs to be held accountable for what's going on right now, and we need to see some changes within that team, within that organization, structurally, from the top, and a new culture needs to be built there for them to really find the success that they want to as an organization moving forward. Because it's just not about the team performance. It's not just about team record. It's about how the entire organization carries themselves as a whole. That's all the time we have here for this segment. Coming up next, we're going to get into some around the training camp news right here on the podcast. So stay tuned for that if you want to hear about what's everything going on the GSMC football podcast.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment we discussed very serious allegations against Dan Snyder and everything from an article and some statements that have been released. We discussed all of that. I gave my thoughts on it and what I think Washington should do. I think Dan Snyder should sell the team and really do the overhaul of the Washington culture and environment that has been created there over the last couple of decades. And, you know, once these changes are made, I feel like the Washington football team can fully now make a change and move forward going into the future. So that's kind of the big thing here. But also on the podcast, we're obviously going to get into some training camp news right now and talk about some things happening around camps. And first thing we're going to get into is the Patriots QB situation. Obviously, we've heard many reports that Jarrett Stidham has not played well. He's been hurt. And so it looks like at this point, Cam Newton is definitely a shoo-in as the starting quarterback. Or is he? Cam Newton doesn't feel like that. Cam Newton says he absolutely does not feel like the Patriots starting QB yet. Obviously, Cam Newton's continuing to embrace the underdog role that he has put himself under, obviously knowing that feeling everybody's against him in the league, especially since the Carolina Panthers had cut him. And even though he's worked primarily with the first team offense, he still says he's not the guy on day one, absolutely. And I quote, Cam says, "Absolutely not. Every day is a work day for me. That label is not important to me right now. I have so much to learn I need to get better at. So much I need to be comfortable with throughout this process. That's the last thing I'm pretty much worried about." Obviously, Newton, we all know, we've seen the workout videos of him working out to gospel. You know he's about to tear up the league because of that. But, you know, he's approached the season very motivated since the Panthers released him. You know, he signed a very incentive-laden deal, but his base salary was not a lot. And, you know, Cam, you know, is on a mission this year. And Bill Belichick is giving Cam the ability and the opportunity to kind of show, hey, he can still be one of the best players in the league and still be a starter in this game. Obviously, you know, there have been some reviews from him and Cam. Bill Belichick said he's an extremely hard-working player. First guy in, last guy out. He studies hard and has spent a lot of time, extra time, learning the offense. I've been very impressed with that. He's a very skilled athlete. Also, Newton made a comment about where he's trying to learn from the other quarterbacks in New England's camp have succeeded. And he says this: "There are certain things when I come to the line of scrimmage, and it's just not firing mentally as I would want it to be rather than other plays that may be called. I see a person like Brian Hoyer go up to the line. He's as sharp as can be. For me, asking him questions, he answers them. Jarrett Stidham too. There are things I know I need to become better at. Until those things are done, everything else is irrelevant." Obviously, Newton continues to say he's a work in progress, obviously learning the playbook, getting used to his new teammates, but obviously his goal is to strive for success. Obviously, Newton, if he can do that, will probably be the week one starter, which I think everybody's already projecting at this point he will be. I think everybody's projecting him to be the week 1 starter anyway, because it just doesn't seem like anybody else really is in position to take that spot from him, as Jarrett Stidham, like I said, has not had a very good off-season and training camp start. Also, we have some news. And it's this. Obviously Seattle, we talked about them earlier because of the Earl Thomas thing. But basically what's going on right now is Russell Wilson says he's trying to play another 15 years. And he's 31, I think. 31, I believe. So he would be playing until he's 46. Remember, Brady said he wanted to play until he was 45. So obviously Russell is kind of aiming for the same thing. He obviously is going into his 9th season. He discussed what he wanted. He says he got at least 10 plus years left. And listen, we have to look at Russell Wilson. He does keep his body in pretty good shape. He does keep his body in probably top peak shape, really. He's never been a guy who, really slacks on his training. He never takes a lot of big hits. That's one thing they have always said about Russell throughout his entire career. He has never been a guy who takes a lot of big shots. Never been a guy who takes a lot of big shots. So obviously that helps. He's been very durable. Even though he's had not the greatest offensive line in the world, he's been a very durable player. He's coming off one of his best seasons. And you could see, he has a lot of confidence about what's going on. And that confidence could take him somewhere. And I think, even though he did lead the season with sacks, got sacked 48 times, I think definitely Russell, especially with quarterbacks nowadays being able to play until they're 40, I think we could say he'll play until he's 40. I think that's a safe assumption to make there. But maybe he could play 41, 42, 43. We don't know. We'll have to see how Russell kind of develops over time. We'll have to see how he goes and how things continue to run when moving forward with a guy like Russell Wilson. Obviously the face of the Seattle Seahawks, and could be the face of the Seattle Seahawks for 2 decades, because there's a great point now that you potentially could have a face of your franchise now, because before you would have the face of your franchise like QB maybe for a decade. Usually a decade, maybe 12, 13 years, depending on the situation. Now you could have your face of your franchise for literally almost 2 decades. Do you realize the type of security that is, knowing, hey, we draft the quarterback in 2020, we may not actually have to worry about another QB taking over to like 20, 36, 37, 38. That's security right there. That is some security right there. But now we're going to get some other news. Obviously continuing on in the training camp roundabout. Joe Burrow is getting great reviews early, as Zach Taylor says he breathes life into the Bengals offense. Obviously, Joe Burrow had no OTAs, no rookie cap, and minimal physical interaction with his NFL coaching staff since becoming the first pick in April. But he's apparently impressing his new Cincinnati teammates, and head coach Zach Taylor told reporters on Tuesday that Burrow has invigorated the offense. And he said this: "You want your quarterback to be the hardest worker on the team, and an extension of the coaching staff," Taylor said. "He fits both descriptions for us. Right now, he really breathes life into this offense and into this team. No coach, and certainly no second-year head coach, is going to come straight out and just expect, stellar play from the get-go at top level. But when preparation is more vital than ever and egos are too valuable to deflate, it's important that Taylor and Burrow find a way to complement each other as they progress through this together." Obviously, there's a lot of hype that comes with being the number 1 overall draft pick, plus also the hype after having the season Burrow had at LSU. Taylor also said this: "He's done nothing since he's been in the building or on the field to make us second guess any of those decisions in terms of taking him or making the starting quarterback day one." Obviously, they opened up the season against the Los Angeles Chargers, so that'll be the first time we actually get to see Burrow in action and see how he plays against a real NFL defense with no camps except training camp, and see how he plays. Because all you can hope for really from this is just the progression. You want to see progression. You want to see improvement. You want to see a player who continues to move forward and play well moving on into the future. So obviously that's going to be the big thing moving on forward with him, and we'll have to see what happens when it comes to, the Bengals this season with Joe Burrow and Zach Taylor. In other news, Zach Ertz and the Eagles are re-engaged in contract talks ahead of the season. Obviously, this has been a big offseason for tight ends. Hooper, Kittle, Kelsey, all getting big money. Zach Ertz is the last Pro Bowl tight end we look at that I think is a good that we believe is going to end up getting some big money. Obviously, they picked up his fifth-year option, so he's going to be there for this year and next. But an extension is definitely in the works. Obviously, Ertz turned down a deal more lucrative than the 4-year contract Austin Hooper signed, worth more than $44 million. Now, obviously, Kittle sets the new standard at $75 million. So now it'll be interesting to see where Ertz kind of gets his money. Where is his money going to be? Obviously, we know how big a part of the offense that Ertz is to the Philadelphia Eagles. It could put them in a very interesting dilemma because Dallas Goedert has also played at a high level. So if they paid Kelsey, would they be willing to pay both of their tight ends big money, or would Dallas Goedert potentially have a chance to go somewhere else and be a starting tight end there, as he has obviously showed he could be a very reliable tight end as well. So a lot is happening there. I think Kelsey will probably get, I think between the Kelsey Kittle range, potentially. I think that'll be around what he gets. So that's going to be interesting to see the actual numbers if they are able to get it done moving forward. Budda Baker and the Cardinals agree on a 4-year, $59 million extension. He obviously getting paid a lot of money. Crazy thing about it is he didn't even record a single interception. So that's also very interesting. Though he did have 147 tackles, 7 tackles for loss, and 6 passes defended. He also had 3.5 sacks and 4 forced fumbles during his first 3 seasons. But that is very interesting, knowing a guy, usually defensive backs get paid based off their ability to pick off passes. Budda Baker doesn't do it, but he does everything else well, and that was able to really get paid. And then also another thing about it is this. 4 years, $59 million. And that's the highest paid safety in NFL history. Doesn't it feel like safeties have been paid more than this? It's kind of crazy to think a safety hasn't been paid more than 4 years, $59 million. Because the way people are getting paid nowadays, that looks like a kind of a small number a little bit. Like really, it looks kind of like a small number. So obviously, that's obviously an interesting, thing to look at. But obviously, he's reset the market, obviously, doing something like that. So we'll have to see what it actually turns into. Because obviously, it's always important as a player when you feel like you're the one who has reset the market and can help other future players at your position potentially getting paid moving forward. So that's going to be the interesting situation, like I said, moving forward. But that's all the time we have here on the GSMC Football Podcast. Thank you for tuning in once again to another podcast with me. Thank you for letting me be part of your day. Don't forget to listen to our other amazing GSMC Football Podcast, or actually GSMC Podcast on the GSMC Podcast Network. Also, don't forget to leave a review, subscribe, like, please. We definitely enjoy and want that type of feedback from you guys. Don't also forget to follow us on Twitter at GSMC_FFootball. I mean, not F football, but GSMC Football on Twitter. We love to interact with you on there, talk about all things that's happening around the NFL and college football as well. So this is your host, Brice, signing out, saying, hope you have a good day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.